Yeah, so my name is Cajsa Larsson, and I'm a sound designer slash music maker. I I am currently working at Sharkmob, but in the past I've also worked at Ubisoft Massive, and I ran an indie game company called Forgotten Key for almost 8 years. So let's get on this. I'm gonna start with showing you just a little bit of what I've worked with in the past. So here is, it's a little bit dated because my current workplace and my former workplace, everything is behind heavy NDAs and I can't really talk about them. So, but here is some of the work that I did previous to that. Let's Yes, so this talk is going to be a little bit about my approach to sound design and what kind of sounds I enjoy making the most and what inspires me. And oh shit, why can't I move things now? Okay, there we go. Yes, so a little bit briefly about me. I studied digital audio production at Blekinge Institute of Technology through 2010 and 2013. In my first year, I met up with a few friends and we entered a contest called Game Concept Challenge. It's a concept that is in Karlstad, which is actually still a thing. So make sure if you have like a indie game company or if you have a game design, just a game idea or whatever, make sure you look for contests and just get your name out there and just enter contests, and then you have an opportunity to win something, and you have an opportunity for somebody to critique your work, which is super helpful. But yeah, so we entered a contest, we won it, and part of that contest was we had to form a company. So we did that, and then part of the contest was also we had to make a game in 10 weeks, which was super nice because we got to make this really, really small game, which at the end of the summer we had finished, and we could actually say to people, hey, we made a game, which is, and it's such a learning experience just to create a whole thing. But yeah, so we formed a company called Forgotten Key in 2011, and we were 4 people at the time. And then during our thesis project, we started, so in 2013, we started working on a game called what would become Air Memories of Old. And essentially, that is our major release that we did with Forgotten Key. We released Air in 2017. Then, unfortunately, due to some problem with funding, we had to shut down in 2019. And then I started working at Ubisoft Massive. as a music designer, music implementer. And then I left Massive to work at Sharkmob, which is where I am today. So, yes. And a little bit about Forgotten Key. So that was quite a journey. When we started, we were 4 people, and towards the end, we were actually 16 people. And I'm gonna go a little bit on a bragging journey, so bear with me. But yeah, we worked with companies such as Bandai Namco, Sony, and Daedalic Entertainment to make games. And we also released on a lot of platforms, including Xbox One, PlayStation 4, and of course Steam. Air has received more than 2,000 user reviews on Steam. A lot of articles, press reviews, and super nice things. And we were nominated for a bunch of awards, some of which we actually won, which is also really nice. But yeah, so I prefer to talks that actually show you some like hands-on how these things were made. So that's what I'm going to be doing in this talk, and most of the examples will be from Air. So therefore, I'm going to give you a little bit the briefing about Air. So it's, as I said before, it started off as our thesis project. And actually, here's our really, really early prototype that you can see here. So you're flying around as a pizza box. Really, we should have just gone with this. Why even bother making her into a bird instead, like a pizza box flying pizzas? Isn't that like literally everyone's dream? Such a cool thing. And then it was really cumbersome because you like had to like steered the bird or the pizza box with the mouse, so it was kind of cumbersome. But actually, that was what turned into Air then. And because it started off as a thesis project and we were students, we had little to no budget. Like it was a lot of just working with what we had. And that also meant that it was very DIY. I didn't have any expensive gear, pretty much. I was just working with what I used for school and what I had already gathered and what I could borrow from friends. And that also meant that at the time we couldn't use. So if you're familiar with audio, usually you're working with a middleware solution for audio. So you have the game engine, which was Unity for this. And then you have like a middleware solution that you import the audio to, and that communicates with Unity, and it makes it so much easier to do a lot of really complicated audio things. But at the time, I think Wise has like a lot of different licensing options for indies nowadays. So if you are an indie, you should not exclude Wise, because I think it's great. But at the time, they didn't have the same opportunities. So we didn't use Wise. We used a middleware, not a middleware. We used a plugin for Unity called Master Audio, which, to be honest, I think it's very good nowadays, but we couldn't actually get it to work properly. I don't know if that was due to Master Audio or it was due to our implementation, but there was some basic functionality that we couldn't get to work. But yes, and also as I was a student, I didn't have a lot of experience. It was a lot of me just learning by doing and just doing a ton of research. I remember going to Gamma Sutra and reading, there was an article about the sound of journey, and I read that over and over and over again, trying to implement a lot of the stuff he did in my work. So it was a lot of the things I did on Air was me doing them for the very first time, which was such a joy to just try a bunch of stuff. And it was such a privilege because we didn't have a lot of money, and we didn't have a lot of gear, and we didn't have a lot of experience. We did actually have time, sort of. It was always a constant battle with finding money and funds. And so in that sense, we did not always have a lot of time, but we did somehow somehow we always ended up finding the time to do a bunch of stuff anyways. And due to the nature of game development and music making and sound design, a lot was thrown away. And also that's of course also by the fact that I was doing this for the first time. So a lot of this was like me trying a bunch of things out and then noticing, oh, this isn't working. I have to redo it. I think we actually, for the music, I think we actually switched genres four times. We started off making this extremely synthy approach that was heavily inspired by M83. And then I was like into a post-rock phase. So I was like, oh, I want to make it sound exactly like God is an Astronaut. And of course I couldn't do that because I had no experience making post-rock. And I remember one of the team members was like, I'm not really feeling those really heavy drum tracks. So we discarded that. And in the end, we found some kind of middle ground where I made like a folksy, synthy, ambient type of music things that I'm going to show you a little bit of later. So yeah, I'm going to start by talking about some of the SFX and my approach to them. So I usually like to work with setting some kind of like, what is my goal with creating these sounds? What do I want to achieve? What do I want this to sound like? And so this is of course very, very few of the goals that I actually set, but I set some, which was I wanted the sounds, the majority of the sounds, to be fairly low key. For instance, like if you have a footstep, you could make a very toony sound, which is going to grab a lot of your attention, especially the first times you hear it, because it's going to be da 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 da. Or you could make a very, very low key that you don't really notice. And that was what I wanted to do. I wanted to make it so that nobody would ever think about the footsteps. Then I read a few reviews, and actually some of the people were actually talking about the snow footsteps. So I guess I failed in making them low key because people actually noticed them. And one reviewer actually really hated them. And one reviewer was writing like, oh, the footsteps for the snow is like the best thing. So yeah, contradicting experiences, but what can you do? And then, so low key was one thing. I wanted to make it like a stylized realism, and that kind of ties into the low key part. I wanted sounds that you wouldn't like necessarily think, oh, but footsteps don't really sound like this, or a water doesn't sound like this. I wanted you to like kind of tie them to the sounds that you hear in real life, but I also wanted them to be very minimal and stylized. So going with the footsteps analogy that I've already talked about, when you walk on something, usually you hit with your heel and then you hit with your toe and your heel and your toe. But for this project, I decided I just wanted one impact. So I skipped like the whole heel toe thing. And there's just one impact sound of her hitting her feet on the ground, which I think is just like makes it a little bit easier to read and also fits the animations a lot better, because I haven't looked at them in a while, but I don't think you actually see so much heel-toe action in the game. And then I wanted to contradict all the low-key stylized realism with magical moments and musical sounds, and having them be a little bit larger than life. And I think a great way to do that is to just add a little bit of musical flair into those. And yeah, some difficulties we had with creating the goals and managing them. I had really bad recording conditions. And as you can see now, also, I've also always recorded in my home. And I think when I started Air, I was in the living room, which is actually not that bad, because you have carpets and you have couches and they absorb audio. So there's not necessarily like an intense amount of reflections going around in the room. However, then I moved and I actually got my own room for recording and doing audio work, which was so good. So good to have your own room, and you can just close the door and pretend that nobody is there. However, it was a very small room and I didn't treat it in any way. So the reflections were just going across the room, which meant that I didn't do a whole lot of recording, even though I had my own room. So, but just like whenever I would record my like vocals or whatever, like there would just be so many reflections, and I couldn't actually close the door because then it got worse because it had another area that it could reflect onto, and just. But yeah, and now I'm in a bedroom, which is again, it's fairly decent because I have a bed and I have a like carpet thing, and it's not as bad as it was in my last room. But yeah, another difficulty was that we had a very small budget to buy anything, and that can be an issue. I remember, for instance, I wanted at some point to use a plugin called Omnisphere, which is like a sample-based instrument thing, and I wanted to use it for a certain sound effect. So I checked the agreement with them, like, can I use this for sound effects? And they were like, no, you'll have to buy a license for, I think they wanted like 40,000 Swedish kroner to use it for sound effects. And I was like, no, that's not going to happen. So we didn't have a large budget to buy things, which meant that I had to be more creative with what I made. And another difficulty, and this goes for all audio, we're almost always last in the process. Like, you usually want to, like, before you like make final audio, you want to see like the details of the animation and the details of the environment. And sometimes, I mean, you can always try and do your best without seeing them, but it just makes it so much easier when you actually see what the final product is like. So that also is a difficulty. So some solutions for these difficulties. Fairly early on, I bought Isotope Denoiser, which is a plugin that analyzes the noise in an audio clip, and then if you put it on like on a track with a lot of noise and a lot of stuff you want to actually hear, it can actually analyze the noise and remove that, so you only get the things that you want to hear, and that helped me a lot. I have bad equipment which is noisy, and I have noisy rooms with a lot of buzz and humming, and using Denoiser made it so much easier for me because I could record sounds that were not perfect and somehow use them anyways. I also bought a lot of sound packs at indie sites. So instead of like buying a huge ass sound pack, which has everything from motorcycles to guns to winds, I could just buy the wind part because I didn't need, there are no vehicles whatsoever, and I don't need any vehicle sounds, so I could just buy a library full with wind sounds or water sounds or whatever I needed at the moment. And that helped a lot because sometimes it can be tricky to record some things, and you need to be able to buy things that other people have recorded. And another solution is to just experiment, try a bunch of things. I know I tried to record my own voice instead of animals sometimes, and sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But yeah, that's the privilege of having a little bit of time and wiggle room to try a bunch of stuff. And also another solution is just, some sounds are good in context. They don't sound great by themselves. And you just have to lower the volume, maybe you pitch it down a little bit, and somehow it works. Even though it's a lo-fi sound that doesn't work by itself, it can work in the context of a game, because maybe you're only hearing that sound when you're playing music, or maybe you only hear that sound in the context of another sound, or maybe you can layer it on top of another sound and get a completely new sound, and then it kind of works. And the thing we did a lot to try and make the last in the process thing a little bit easier is we worked with Playblast, and our animator, he worked in Maya, and in Maya you can export video files called Playblasts of animations. So whenever he would make an animation, he would export work in progress video files, and I could start working on the sounds for the animations, and then he could he would get a little bit further in the process of making the animation, and I would get a new video and I could update my old video file, and it just made it so much easier to actually work in parallel instead of waiting for him to be done before I started, because then I would have to work so quickly because, you know, the deadlines are often kind of tight, and you usually don't have, everyone wants to work for as long as possible to get their thing to be as good as it can be. And that goes for animation, and that goes for audio as well. So the quicker I can get something going on, the more time I can have to actually make sure that it sounds okay. Yeah, and sometimes, this last one is just about lowering your expectations. Sometimes it's better to just have a sound than to not have a sound, and it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be the best sound. It's just better to have something that tells you, oh, this happened, or this is happening over there, and then you can hopefully replace a bad sound in the end. But also, if you don't, that's just nature of game development. It's not going to be perfect. So yes, and I'm going to show you a little bit of my gear. So as I said, I was a student in the start, and actually I didn't have a lot of stuff, but I did have some stuff. I had a condenser mic, which you can actually, I still have it here. Still like my only condenser mic. I should really get another one. It's always, actually, I always keep it like this. So there's probably like a layer of dust inside the microphone. I'm just too lazy to rig it up every time I use it. And then I'm never going to use it. So I better I just keep it here, because then I at least use it every once in a while. And yeah, then I had a very old recording device. It's called a Zoom H4n that my mom gave to me when I think I was 18 or something. And I still keep it. It's still like my only recording device that I have. So I've had it now for 12 years. And yeah, it's a noisy thing that's not meant to use it the way I am using it. I think it's like a low budget music recorder, but I use it for everything. And I have gone kind of I actually really like it now, even though I would like to get a better one. And at the time I had a Focusrite Scarlett Sapphire Pro sound card. Now I have another sound card, Native Instruments sound card. And I had an expensive PC, because that is the one thing that I always prioritize is I use a lot of plugins in my work. I use a lot of heavy, CPU-heavy things in my line of work. And I also use Pro Tools, which also is rather CPU-heavy. So I just prefer to put my money into a decent computer so that I can actually do the work. And even though I had a fairly expensive computer at the time, I was getting a lot of CPU errors because I just had so many instances of things loaded in at the same time. And so yeah, I always try and go for a fairly good PC, because that enables my work. And I think that's something that I try and do. And you don't necessarily need one. You can make great music or great sound design on a crappy laptop. So that's not what I'm saying. It's just, for me, I like it. And I didn't even have studio monitors at the time. I didn't have any fancy monitors for listening back to my work, which is, as you can see, this is my old room when I had a tiny space. So having a good set of monitors in there would just the sound would bounce all over the room. So it wouldn't have made super much sense for me to have a great set of studio monitors. So I just had my gaming Logitech setup. Now I actually have studio monitors, but I'm so used to working on headphones that I rarely use them, other than sometimes as a reference. But yeah, I had headphones, and I didn't have a great set of headphones at the time. I think I had some kind of Sennheiser that you can buy for $80 or 800 Swedish kroner, and they worked fairly decent, but I wasn't hearing as much low end, and I made some it made it a little bit trickier for me to actually hear what's going on in the audio. And now I have really nice headphones. I have these HD 650 that I really, really like. And they're not super expensive nowadays either. I think they go for like $250. But they're open back, so it doesn't work in like an open office environment, but they're really good for using for at home. And then I kind of stole my boyfriend's electric guitar and all his amplifier. I kind of don't tell him this, but it's mine now. It's essentially mine. I adopted it, and it likes me more than it likes him now. So, but yeah, I also bought a beginner banjo that you can see over there, and I had an old acoustic guitar that I had forever. And when I adopted his electric guitar, I also bought a few guitar pedals used secondhand. I think I have a distortion, delay, and reverb. I love delay and reverb. You can never go wrong with delay and reverb. And I also bought an EBO. So if you don't know what an EBO is, I have it right here. It's this nifty little thing. I'm gonna grab my guitar a little bit quickly and just show you what it does. So yeah, it's kind of just you have this thing, and it makes the strings vibrate. So you put it here. I haven't actually used this in a while, so maybe I won't get it working. You have a technique where you like put it towards the strings. Yeah, and it makes the strings vibrate in a way that you don't get when you pick them. Yeah, I don't know if you actually can hear this. It's kind of low, but yeah, it's very cool. Great for creating drones and other kind of types of sounds. And you can use it on electric guitar, you can use it on acoustic guitar, you can use it on banjo. I usually use it on electric guitar because I find that it works best that way. But yeah, and I also of course have a MIDI keyboard for triggering things in my DAW. Yeah, and then I'm gonna talk a little bit about what gets me going and what I learned like from Air, and that is kind of like to set yourself up for creativity. I like to surround myself with just a little bit of chaos, just so I can pick things as I go. Like on a regular basis, I have tiny things around me that just kind of inspire me. I love, for instance, tiny music boxes that you can like just, I should. So yes, Old Country Road. And then, I can record that and I can import it into Pro Tools and I can chop it up and I can reverse it. I can put a lot of things so you don't recognize it as Old Country Road. I have this, I'm not sure what it's called in English. I think it's in Swedish. It's called Der Duva or something. No, Lergök. And you put a little bit of water in there. And it just makes a cool sound. And you can get it working. Kazoo. I have a kazoo here that I rarely use, but it's nice to just trigger some kind of... And I have a set of weird like meditation balls. I don't meditate, but they make a nice clingy sound that I can record. And actually behind me, I just have a bunch of stuff that I laid out here. I made my mom has like so many things in her home. So at one point I was like, I'm gonna make my own instruments. And we made two of these. One which is huge and one that is this. I'm not even sure if it works anymore because I just keep it. But essentially it's supposed to be like this, and you go and you can tie it up, and it's supposed to be like sort of bassy. And as you can see in the image, I took an image of the chaos that is my bed right now, that I put everything, or a little bit of everything. I have even more stuff in my closet. But so you can see, I even put a hairdryer in because that could be a really cool, nice texture to have in a track. Like you could you could record the hairdryer, and you could like have a kick or like a drum sound, and you could use the drum sound to like lower the volume to make basically side chain the hairdryer, and the hairdryer would be a nice texture, and you could distort it. And yeah, I've actually a lot of times I've like had the experience I'm working on a track and something is happening in the background. Like for instance, one time I was working on a track and I think it was like the fire cars were like driving past me, and I was like, oh shit, it sounded really good with the track. And I was like, so I grabbed my recorder, I stood at the window, and I was like, please, please let the fire cars come by one more time, which obviously makes me a horrible person because I was praying for another fire, I guess. But yeah, it was terrible because it was like a pizza place, I think, that had burned down. So, but yeah, I got a recording of the fire cars as they passed, and I used it for the track. And nobody got hurt in the fire, so so that was good. So yeah, but yeah, I actually used that on the recording, and I could pan like the cars as they passed and put a little bit of reverb and make for a cool atmospheric fire truck passing. But yeah, so what I like to do is I like to surround myself with things I like, and whether that is like a book, a notebook. In the past I've recorded me just doing like this and then using that as percussion. And I've like hit my pen with something on my desk, and I use that as percussion as well. So you just make tiny things in your everyday life. It makes it easier to find inspiration. And also surround yourself with things you don't like. And that is also something that I think is kind of cool. Like I would, for instance, I'm very terrified of water, but at one point I would love to like make a sound of me just screaming underwater and have like an underwater microphone, picking that up and using that for music. That would be absolutely awesome and absolutely terrifying because I'm so afraid of water. But yeah, and as you can notice, sounds can literally be found everywhere. So you just have to be open to finding some sounds, and if you're up for it, like bring a recorder with you. I don't do that anymore because I find myself like being a little bit, I need some time off to like just be me and not be like a person who's on the hunt for sounds in my everyday life. But if you want to do that, that's totally up to you. I have had some nice recordings with, like, I think I was at a plant store at once and they were opening up the roof and it sounded absolutely insane. And I had my recorder with me so I could record it. But nowadays, whenever I find a sound that I really like, I just record it with my phone because you can get a decent recording with your phone as well if you don't like need to have a super hi-fi sound, because then of course you need a recorder. And I find, and that goes with the next part, that I find it's better to just have a shitty recording than to not have a recording at all. I record a bunch of stuff on my phone that I never even listen back to, but every once in a while I go, okay, I look for my recordings and I go, oh shit, this is a really cool recording. I should use this for something. And then I'm really happy to just have recorded it instead of just letting it pass me by. And that also goes with the next part, that when you're open for the sounds in your area, you can find unexpected sources of music everywhere, and you can hear like a door that just cracks just in that perfect rhythm, and you can actually use that as a percussion part. Or so yeah, that's really nice also to have afterwards, because you can say, oh, that was like I have this thing, and it's actually the lawnmower on my lawn that passed me by. That's actually also happened. I heard a lawnmower, and I was like working on this intense post-rocky kind of vibe, and it was working perfectly with the track that I was at the time, and it gave me just like this distorted source that I could use. And I like, as a starting point, I like to shuffle through a lot of plugin presets. I find that having a preset just gives you somewhere to start, and then you can tweak that as you go along. So if you have a synth and you don't know where to start. You don't know how to make the sound you want. And sometimes you don't even know what sound you're after. And then it's just easy to scroll through presets until you find something you like, and then you can tweak that into something that you like even more. And as I said before, be open for opportunities. I like to make weird mouth noises, and I have found myself having unexpected talents with that. I voice acted like in our One Forgotten Key game, we had like a troll, and he was and I made a little song with him going. You just find yourself like being good at things you didn't even know you could, like doing sounds that you didn't know you could do. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about air and how I approached that. So, and for this purpose, we're using Google Meets, and I couldn't actually get Google Meets to work with actually showing you my Pro Tools sessions so I recorded a bunch of videos of me doing this stuff, and I hope that works fine. But yeah, let me know if something is unclear, and I can show you that later. But yeah, the sound of air is like a lot of just messy electric guitars, especially when it comes to like the musical effects and the actual soundtrack. And what happened was I was working on a track, and I didn't know what genre we would be going for, and I was just experimenting with a bunch of stuff. And then I found this guitar sound that I really enjoyed. So. Yes, so I started just making a bunch of different guitar setups, and I had my volume pedal, so I was fading in the guitars, and I had them go to a reverb, and then to a phaser, and then to a delay, and then into another reverb. And I just found this sound that I really, really liked, and I decided, oh, but this sound could be like a bass line or a preset of sorts. And I can just experiment with making a lot of different guitar sounds in this session. So I had this session to go back to, and I could just do weird stuff with my guitar and have all the effects already there, so I could audition them and hear what they sounded like without me having to add effects every single time. And that a lot of musical sound effects were actually made in that session. I'm going to show you some of those. So here is a thing in air. It's basically you have these ghosts that are memories of the past, and I wanted for the players to be able to find those ghosts using 3D place sounds. So, and I wanted, like, because it's ghosts, I wanted a human element, so I wanted some voice in there, and I also wanted like a musical element because they're essentially larger than life, being memories of the past. So I went on a search for making a musical sound that would fit them. So I opened up my session with all these plugins. And then I opened up my session. I was noodling on the guitar. And of course, my boyfriend walks in and he's like, hey, that's my guitar. And I want to noodle on it. So I was like, okay, sure, that's not annoying, like just going in and disturbing my work. But I was also like, oh, sure, like, why not? And I actually ended up recording him noodling on the guitar. And so this is not actually what I heard when he noodled because I had all the effects on, but I'm going to show you the dry signal just for clarification of what is actually going on. So this is him noodling on the guitar. Yes, and then you add in some effects, just a little bit of like a amplifier, like a virtual amplifier, a little bit of distortion. Oh no, this is actually the same thing I showed you before. Here is the new thing, a little bit of distortion. Yeah, just a little bit brighter sounding. And then, oh, why do you do that? And then you actually, oh yeah, okay. So then I added in a little bit of reverb, my first crystallizer. And crystallizer, for those of you who don't know, it's a plugin that is really nice. It is a delay plugin. And if you don't know what a delay plugin is, it's something, it's something that takes the signal and then it repeats part of the signal. So it's an echo effect essentially. And the crystallizer in turn is an echo effect. So it takes the signal and repeats. And then, but they also add a layer of pitch. So you can pitch the echo up and down. So essentially it can create all these nice crystally effects. So I added a little bit of that and a little bit of regular echo and a little bit of reverb. Yes. And already here we can hear, oh, I can hear like, oh, I could probably do something with that. I could probably like stretch it. I can reverse it. I can chop it up and have something with that. But then I also have another step where I actually have even more plugins going on. So I have a layer of another crystallizer, I think, another echo. And here is what this sounds like. So yeah, and if you heard that last part, that was when I was like, oh shit, I can totally just cut away all the beginnings because I'm not really interested in that. But that last part, the tail, I really, really, really like that. It kind of sounds like almost choiry in a way. So I chopped it up, I looped it, and I had my musical element for the ghosts. Yeah, I still really like it actually. Kind of has some kind of choir sound to it, which is nice. And then I wanted, like as I said before, a human element to it as well. So I was using my creative chaos techniques here as well, which, to be honest, I think I could have dialed down a little bit on the chaos for these. I don't think it made all that much difference. But every once in a while, you find out that you have made something awesome, and every once in a while, you spend 4 hours trying to imitate the lamp, and you just throw all those recordings away. And if you have a privilege to have the time to do that, that's awesome. Go for it. But yeah, I was recording myself sounding as a ghost, and I was looking at my cat, and she was all curled up in a little ball, and I think I was kind of tired that day. So I went like, oh, in Swedish, jag önskar att jag vore en liten, liten boll. Which is essentially in English, I wish I was a tiny, tiny ball. And then I started saying that, and I started like going, oh, I wish I was a tiny, tiny ball. But in Swedish, and it kind of with a little bit of reverb, I sound like this. Yeah, because obviously ghosts talk in this really deep voice, and it's really ghost-like, because that's obviously my stereotype of how a ghost sounds. And then I also wanted, if you've ever watched Twin Peaks, I think I had watched Twin Peaks at this point, and I was really inspired by how they have this otherworld kind of cabin thing. And in the cabin, they have these weird voices. And what they do is essentially to create these voices, they have the actor say the manuscript in reverse. So they're not saying the actual words, but they are saying it sort of like, but in backwards. And then they record that and they reverse it. So it sounds like the actors are actually saying the words, but the rhythm and the intonation is going to be completely out there and completely whacked because it's hard to say something in reverse. And then, so I wanted to experiment with that because I've always wanted to do that. So I figured, why not have a ghost that talks sort of in reverse? And when I talked, so I said, I wish I was a tiny ball, but I said it in reverse, and then I reversed it. And here's what it sounded like after I reversed it. Oh, okay, same again. Sorry. Yeah, so it's essentially saying vara en liten boll. And it has this kind of like otherworldly nature to it because I was speaking in reverse. And then I wanted to get some English in there as well. And I was like just improvising. What does a ghost say? Obviously, it's going to talk about how everything was taken from them. So I just started rambling like, everything is taken from me. I want it back. Because ghosts, they talk like that. Yeah, and they obviously talk in a very whispery fashion. So I had a bunch of these takes, and I added in some takes from friends and that also like from who are male because I wanted some male voices in there, and this sound ended up sounding like this in the end. Oh, sorry. Yeah, and I think in the end, I think I could have made a longer loop because I chopped it all up, made a loop, and I think you can hear how it loops in the game. However, I also do think that it's a very nice sound, and I'm very happy with it. I just wish it was longer so you wouldn't notice the loop as much. But yeah, I also, of course, pitched it up and down depending on what track is playing in the background. So every area has essentially its own version of the ghost that I've pitched up and down. Yeah. And then in the same session that I created the ghost sounds, or the musical elements of the ghost sounds, I just started like hitting my guitar. I just basically was trying to build a library of different musical sounds that I could use for different textures and different elements. So I started hitting on the guitar. I was like just dragging my hands across. I was using this ebow, and I just made all kinds of weird sounds that I recorded, and some of them were later when I went through the library that I essentially had created of weird guitar sounds. I could go back and I could like, oh, but this kind of works with that, and this kind of works with that. And I didn't actually know what I was going to end up using them for beforehand, but it was really nice to have, because I set up like I wanted larger than life musical sounds. I could essentially create a library of those kind of sounds, and I could go back to that library when I needed it, and I could also just go back to my session and use that session as a preset to create new sounds when I needed them. But yeah, I had these gods that I wanted to create sound, like that I needed sound for. So I went back to my session and I found a bunch of sounds that I had made hitting on the guitar. And these are the raw sounds without any effects on them. So yeah, and with the effects, they turned into this. Yeah, so, and then when I had these gods and I needed sound for them, I could just find these sounds and they would work really well in the context of a game. Here is how they sounded in the actual game. So yeah, and actually I was playing this with a sound designer friend of mine, and he was like, when he heard the sound for the whale, he was like, yeah, I heard that sound in a library. And I was like, You definitely did not hear that sound in a library, unless you were like talking about the sound libraries on my computer. But yeah, it's kind of cool that I managed to somehow mimic a sound, or like the way he remembered an actual sound from a library. I guess it also kind of makes the sound a little bit less unique, but it also is nice to just, yeah, I made that sound with my guitar. So yeah, another couple of tracks that I made in that same session is here I just found I had this library, I had a cutscene, I needed sound, and I had made this texture that I just kind of really, really worked with. I didn't even need to chop it up or anything, it just worked with every beat. And yeah, so every once in a while you will get these kind of coincidental things that happen where a sound you made just by accident works completely with whatever you're trying to fit it to, and that's really nice. I also realized that if I like detuned my guitar and like lowered the string a lot, and then I hit the string, and then I turned up the like the what's it called, the pitch. I raised the pitch with by turning the string. I could make risers for a trailer. Yes, so that was me layering a bunch of different electric guitars and tuning up the string as I played. And here's also like the difficulty of having a session with libraries of sounds that you already made and that you don't remember how you made them, is that every once in a while you find a sound and, oh, I would really like to have a variation of this, but you just can't. I just was unable to recreate some of the sounds that I made. So I really had this thing. That I really, really liked, and I tried to recreate it, but I just couldn't get the same timbre and the same. But yeah, this actually inspired one of the very ambient tracks in one of the temples, so it became this. Yes. Let's. Okay. So yeah, let's talk briefly about the music as well. So as I did with SFX, I set up some goals, and then of course, as we changed genres, some of those goals changed. However, these are very abstract goals, so they can fit with any genres. But I had some simple ones that I wanted to. So I wanted to, of course, set the mood with music. I wanted the music to be relatively simple, and I also wanted the implementation to be simple, because we had experimented with some more advanced techniques of implementing a bunch of stems. And then I think at one point in one of the early demos, we had like 5 or 6 stems playing at the same time, and we would switch depending on. But however, since our team was so small and we weren't even using Wise, there were some technical difficulties that made some stems would just not play at certain times, and sometimes they wouldn't trigger right. So it just made it so much trickier to work. And why should I take up so much of like a programmer's time when we only have one? So I wanted it to be simple so that we didn't have to spend as much time, and so that actually the solution could be made by, like, the music system could be made by one of our designers instead of taking up programmer time, and then I could help doing whatever. And of course, I wanted it to be simple, but if possible at all, I wanted it some level of adaptivity so that the music actually like somehow changes with what the player is doing, because it adds so much to a game when you don't. I mean, location-based music is awesome, and the majority of music is location-based in air. However, like when you turn, you have these moments where you're on the ground and there's a super ambient track playing, and then you turn into a bird and it changes. And I think it adds so much to just get an upbeat version of the same track playing at the same time, so that something actually happens when you actually turn into a bird. So I wanted some level of adaptivity, even if it's just very small and easy. And some of the, I guess I didn't even bring up some problems, but here's some solutions to how I made goals. Here are, I made fly and walk version of every track in the overworld, or almost every track. There's one track that doesn't have it, but I made it so that the music changes when you fly and when you're on the ground. I had location-based music because that's relatively easy to implement and also relatively easy to just trigger and make sure it works. I had specific music. I wish I had more of these actually, but every once in a while you have a specific thing that is happening in the world. Like there's a set of crabs who are dancing along, and that area has like a specific track that mutes the bigger track that's going on in the background, so it could have like a tiny track of crabs dancing. And yes, so, and also like some of the technical solutions for this, they were very easy. We had two tracks in the overworld that were playing at the same time. So they were like two versions of exactly the same track, one with drums and melodies, and one that was very ambient and low key. And they were crossfading seamlessly. So we would keep track of where are we in both tracks. And then if we turned into a bird, we would just make sure that the volume of the flying track was raised and the volume of the walking track was lowered, essentially. And for location-based music, we had big ass hitboxes that you fly into, and then they trigger a fade in and fade out of whatever track was playing at the time. And we had our own very simple music and ambient system that was built on top of Master Audio. I'm not sure how Master Audio is today, but it didn't have like a good set of tools to create music systems, so we had to build on top of it in order to make it work. And using Wise or some other type of middleware would have sped up this process, and it would have made it so much easier, and I could have probably made more advanced solutions. However, as I said before, we didn't have the funds at the time. So yeah, that's essentially how we made it. Oh, I guess I was working on this presentation until late last night, and then I worked on it some more this morning, so not all of the slides are very well worked through. But yeah, here's some thoughts on the music. I think silence is super important, and this is actually something that I've noticed in a lot of places, that like the music people and the sound designers and everyone like really wants to create spaces for silence and not to always be bombarded with music. But sometimes I think a lot of people on the team and a lot of people like designers or whatever they're almost like, some people at least are almost afraid of silence, because but we could play a piece of music there and it would be even better, and we could make a nice flow thing, and we should never have silence. But honestly, silence, it's so important. It's what makes the musical moments even more important, and even grander in the set of everything. And I'm a voucher for silence, and I think I really would have liked to have even more silence in air. There's not a lot of silence at the moment. You get it every once in a while, and every once in a while in the area there's no music. But I think even more silence would have made, or I shouldn't say silence because there's always sounds playing in the background, but when I say silence in the context of this, I mean no music, essentially. So I think it would have been better to have less music in some areas to make the moments that we have with music even bigger and feeling larger and nicer. And it also just makes implementation easier, because if you have no music playing, then you can easily, and it's easier to make a good transition into music than if you have one music playing here, one music playing here, and then you have to, maybe they're in a different BPM, playing different rhythms, playing in different keys, and then you have to somehow make a transition between those. And if you just had no music here, music here, and then it would be easier to just make a transition into that instead of having to go from something to something. But yeah, some thoughts on the music in Air as well was that sometimes it gets a little bit repetitive. I'm really happy about the soundtrack, and I'm proud of what I made, especially given my experience at the time and where I was at the time. But it gets a little bit too repetitive. I think I would have liked to have a little bit more granularity with the layers, maybe have even a layer when you're standing still, and especially in the temples, there's just a loop going over and over and over. And even though it's very textural, it's not like a track that has a melody that plays over and over. Sometimes it just gets like a layer of noise that kind of bothers you. And I think some people have problems even with headaches because it's just so present. And I would have liked to make it a little bit more dynamic going back and looking at it right now. But yeah, those are some lessons that I learned. And as I said before, I couldn't actually bring up a Pro Tools session and show you right now, but I recorded some walkthroughs of me and how I set up the music and what it sounds like. So let's take a look at that.
Yeah, so this is a walkthrough of the session for the song called Sun and Moon, which also happens to be my favorite track on the soundtrack. So here we have the walking parts, and here we have the flying parts. I set it up this way so that I could easily see what was on each track, and it's actually a little bit messy. Sorry about that. I'm a messy person. But yeah, let's take a listen to the walking parts. So I wanted this to be very low key and ambient and just kind of give you a nice feeling when you're walking on the islands. And then when you transform into a bird and fly away, I wanted to give you a more boost and feel a little bit more of that hype. So I saved all the drum parts and everything for the flying version. Yeah, let's take a look at the electric guitar parts, which are spread all over this soundtrack. So this is one of the first things that I made. I made this in another session, and then I bounced it all down to one single track. But it's essentially a bunch of electric guitars that I was playing. I was just randomly improvising, playing in the key of a song, and various rhythms, just playing random notes. And then I made that into a loop, and it loops every once in a while. I think it just adds a bit of that breathy, airy vibe. And it actually is, this one is in both the walking and the flying parts. And then out of one of the tracks for that made up this track, I made a drone thing. Oh, sorry. And it sounds like this. It also has a little bit of movement in volume and pitch as you go along, and it's made from this track. Oh, I shouldn't hear that. It's made from this track here. And that is made from this, which is one of the guitars from here. so I essentially just took a little bit of that middle part and I looped it and I made a drone. And then when I had this with a little bit of pitch shifting and stuff, I copy pasted it and made another version with crystallizer on top, so you get that bright crystally sound. And this has a little bit extra movement. I think like the filter is automated. We have a pan man, which so that it moves from left to right. And we also have a face mistress, which just adds a little bit of that extra movement. And that's it for the electric guitars. We have a slow acoustic guitar playing. And then just some pads. And a little bit of melody, like that comes in and out every once in a while. Yeah, that's pretty much it for the walking version. And here we have it flying. So as you can see, I muted the drones, but I still kept those electric guitars in the background, adding a little bit of depth. The main part of it is just this acoustic guitar going on, and then I added some banjo. Banjo riff, and I don't know if you actually caught that, but my cat actually, or my former cat actually sings on this. Yeah, she came in like just at the right time. She had a great sense of rhythm and pitch, obviously, because this sounds fucking amazing. Really, really proud of her singing skills on this track. But yeah. And for the banjo part that I showed you before, so I took that and I also made a new part out of that, which basically is just this part reversed. And I think it came out quite different. And then it goes back to the other banjo part. Maybe not my best transition ever, but it works, sort of. And then we just have some of the pads and stuff that we also had for the walking parts. Oh. And all in all, it sounds like this. So yeah, one thing that I think is super interesting to note is that all the parts that are prominent have been recorded by me have been super heavily edited. Just take a look at this banjo. It's basically every note is pretty much chopped up. And I think I don't consider myself much of an instrumentalist, but I can get a decent take and then I can make some edits. And sometimes I just get a take and I make heavy, heavy edits. But let's take a listen to what it sounds like by itself. By itself, it's not sounding great. You can totally hear how heavily edited it is. Yeah. However, in the context of a full track, it kind of works. Therefore, I made the decision when recording this that it was unnecessary for me to get a better take, because if it works in the context, that's good enough, at least for me. And also, I want to end this by saying this track is in no way or shape or form perfect. It's muddy in parts, the mix is a little bit all over the place and at times, and the snare isn't as snappy as I would have liked, and actually all of the drums aren't like in the place where I would have liked when I listen back now. However, it doesn't need to be. In the game, it kind of works, and it adds a flare of atmosphere. However, it does. If there was one thing that I could have changed, it would have been to make it a little bit less repetitive. I think if you stay in one area for too long, and that goes for all the tracks, it gets a little bit repetitive at times. But you know, you make those are the decisions I made at the time, and I live with them now, and a lot of people ended up liking it anyways. So yeah, that's it for this walkthrough.
Yes, so that was me showing, like past me showing a little bit of how everything was set up and how I made some of the music and how I incorporated some of like, the just going with whatever idea I had at the time. Like, so I built a sound set of different electric guitars in another session, and then I brought them into this session to use in the background, and how I just, oh, sorry. Yeah. Also want to show you another tool that was featured very heavily on the soundtrack and also on the sound of the sound effects, and it's free for everyone to use. So if you're even remotely interested in sound, just grab it and play around with it because it's a lot of fun.
So I'm going to show you another tool that I use quite frequently on the Air soundtrack. It's called Paul's Extreme Sound Stretch, and it's a very useful tool, completely free, very good for experimentation and just putting different sounds in there and seeing what happens. So what it essentially does is it's already there in the name, but it stretches the sound, and it stretches quite extreme so that it becomes quite different from the original sound. And I usually play around with this on a lot of different things. Here I'm going to demonstrate first I'm going to demonstrate it with a scream that I recorded a while back. So this is the scream. Yeah, that's me screaming. And then we import that. And default is to stretch it around 8 times. Let's go with that. And the window size is usually around 7. So what the window size does, it decides how much of a clip it's gonna stretch before it goes to another part of the clip, essentially. So a smaller window size is going to be more true to the dynamics of the original, whereas a bigger sample size will be grabbing a much larger portion of the clip and basically freezing that for the entire duration. So if you have, like, let's say an arpeggio, if you don't know what an arpeggio is, it's basically a chord where you play each note separately. So if you have an arpeggio and you have a large window size or sample size or whatever you choose to call it, it's essentially going to become a regular chord where every note is played at the same time. But yeah, let's hear what the scream sounds with a relatively low stretch and a relatively low window size.
Yes, so that was me doing a little bit of scream. I'm gonna jump forward because I think I went on a ramble here.
Then I layered that with delay and reverb, and this is what the
Yes, so here is me using this on a musical sound instead.
sound. We have this music box thing clip that I made a long time ago. Essentially, a bunch of notes from a music box that I layered after each other, so it sounds like a music box that's kind of falling down somehow. Then I layered that with delay and reverb, and this is what the original sounds like. So yeah, if we stretch it with a lower sample size and a regular stretch size, we have and then if we go with a bigger sample size, a lot less dynamic. Let's go back. And it also has some nice creative tools. I usually like to play around with the octave mixer I whenever I do play with these things, which is not a lot, to be honest. I like to do most of my processing in whatever DAW I'm using. But every once in a while, it's kind of nice to just have a very limited set of effects and just play around and give you a few new ideas. So let's.
Yes, so that is the essential of Paul's extreme sound stretch. I hope you could actually hear that. I don't know, like, what volume. If it didn't, I'm sorry about that. But yeah, I.
So
Um,
I'm gonna show you another.
Okay, so yeah, this is a nice drawing the game director of Air used to describe my process. And to be fair, it's totally accurate. At the time, I've made some changes, and it's a lot less panicky now. But at the time, it was kind of representative. So it's essentially me freaking out, do final, evaluate, and then freak out, do final, evaluate, freak out, do final, evaluate, and. So it's a little bit all over the place. And I've tried to, like, when I look back at it now, I try to incorporate, like, even though it's a little bit less experimental now in my process, I try to incorporate some of that experimentative thoughts, and just do it a little bit less freak outy and a little bit more, okay, I can use this to do this and to do this. But yeah, my process. And some fun facts about the Air soundtrack and how things just happen, and sometimes you just go with the flow. So during our first year or a second year of production, uh, we were at an incubator, and someone actually grabbed a couple of stones to smash through the glass. And I was like, oh no, they stole my computer, which was sad. But the police actually ended up finding it. So it was nice. I got my computer back. But yeah, the thief used these stones. And I was like, oh, free stones, nice. And then I then I grabbed those stones, brought them home with me. And for a lot of SFX where I recorded stones, you actually hear the thief stones that the guy used to break in and steal my computer, which is nice. A little bit fun story, and just kind of adds a little bit of inspiration to my daily work, just going with the flow. And at my local supermarket, which I don't know if you all are Swedes, but there is literally a supermarket chain named City Gross, which is pretty weird. But I went to City Gross and I bought all this cornstarch in order to make snow effects. And when I got at the counter, the lady was like, "Oh shit, you bought a lot of cornstarch." And I was like, "Yeah, sure, I did." Um, but yeah, my boyfriend had his birthday and he got some flowers from his mother, and I was like, "Can I have those? Please let me have your flowers." And I took a shoe and I took some other things. I set up my crappy recorder and I just tortured the shit out of those flowers. Uh, yeah, and my sister actually voice acted the rabbits. For the most part, the animals are actual animal sounds, not necessarily the exact same animal as the animal in the game. But for the rabbits, I just think she had the cutest sounds. So let me share those with you. So that's my sister using her voice to sound a little bit rabbity. But yeah, as I mentioned before, my former cat sings on the soundtrack. And so I also spent, I think it was like 4 hours or something, just trying to really imitate a lamb, because we have these really cute lambas that needed a sound, and if possible, I wanted to be able to make that sound myself, and I didn't have a time to go out and record a bunch of lambs. But I did not end up using those recordings. But now I have a library of me sounding like a lamb, or like, so let's take a listen to those. Yeah, I actually, just because I didn't want to waste 4 hours of work of me sounding like a lamb, I actually grabbed one of those samples and I put it, like, I have a randomized lambs container of sounds that trigger randomly, and I put one of my sounds in there. So it's a lot of actual lambs. They're really cute sounding and I love them. But there's also one that sounds completely different from the rest, and that's me trying to imitate a lamp. And I made up a tiny backstory of that also. Like, I made up a story of, there's like a ghost lamp that goes to possess different lambs, and when they possess the lambs, they get the sound that I made. So there's like me trying to convince myself that there should totally be one sound that sounds very different from the rest of them. But yeah, so a couple of starting points when you're starting a new project from a sound perspective. Talk to your team about the project. Find out as much information as possible about the project, and find out what kind of taste does your teammates have, because no matter what, they're going to probably, like, even if you have a very strong visual vision of what you want the sound to be, they're going to probably influence it quite a bit. And maybe you're working with a game director or somebody who has control over the wholeness of the game. So you need to be in line with your team, and sometimes you can disregard some opinions, but some opinions you really need to take into account. So be aware, like, talk to your team, share your progress, share your work with them. And in the beginning, I also really do make a lot of Spotify playlists. And I have a document also with the Spotify playlist. So I have a track that I think would, like, this element of this track could work in the context of the game. And then I have a document where I describe, okay, so this aspect of this track I really like, and I think we could incorporate that aspect into the soundtrack, just to make sure that everybody knows why. Because sometimes I add a track, and I only really like the 10 first seconds of a track, and then it goes into another part. And you need to make sure that everybody understand which parts of the tracks you actually like and are thinking about. So, and also a starting point is to play other games, like get inspired. I know when I went to school, there was a lot of like people who were like, "Oh, you should never listen to other things and take inspiration from other things because you need to be unique and you need to be like make your completely own things." But other games are a really good just source of inspiration, and sometimes it doesn't need to be games. It can be movies or books or whatever, but just make sure you're consuming some kind of media, and it makes it easier to find inspiration. And if you have an idea, if you have thoughts, if you have, even if it's very abstract, just try and do your best to write it down so that you'll remember it, so that you can share it with other people on your team. Make up rules for yourself. At least that's the way I like to work. When I have a blank set of a page just that I don't know what to do with, I get frustrated. I get like, where should I start? So I need to have rules so that I can get a starting point. And then when I get like a little bit warmed up, I can totally break those rules and just throw them out the window. But in the beginning, I really need to have some rules to just get me going. And some things that I think about frequently is, what is the overall style of the audio? Do I want realism? Do I want it to sound toony? Do I want a very specific sense? Do I want all the sounds to be made with my mouth? Do I want all sounds to incorporate some kind of texture or whatever? And I like to think a lot about those. And I also like to think, what should music and sound convey? What is the player supposed to feel? How are they supposed to feel? And like just to get a perspective of how I can best make my work well in the context of a game, and not make the player think like, oh shit, this audio totally brought me out of the experience. Which, sometimes you succeed and sometimes you don't. But I think a lot about what I want the sounds to convey. And things like very practical things: how much unique content can we make? How much time do we have on our hands to make the content that we need? Can we get some smart solutions so what we reuse some of the content? Do I have content that I've already made that I can use for this? And other practical things like, how will we implement it all? Can we use Wise? Will we have to implement it straight into Unity? Because that adds a lot of difficulty, that influences a lot of decisions. Like, if I know that I'm not using Wise, maybe I will go opt for a simpler solution. If I know that I won't have time to make a good music system, then I will also opt for a simpler solution, and that will also influence how I make the tracks, how I make the music tracks. Can I use a lot of stems that fade in and out? Can I use short loops that randomize between them? Things like that I need to take into account. And also important to know, when does this all need to be done? And all of these things basically will change over time. So your vision should, of course, and your answer to these questions should also change over time. And you should always incorporate the answers to these questions in your vision so that you are in line with the project. And also, if there are any sound designers here, how to get a job? It's a lot of different aspects you need to learn. I think it's so good to learn Wise. Wise is, a lot of people use Wise nowadays. There are probably workplaces that don't, but it's always easier to get a job if you know Wise. Become better at your craft, and therefore ask for feedback so that people can, and you can work up to a decent portfolio. Be a nice person. Like, nobody wants to. Most people don't want to hire an asshole. Most people want to work with a person who helps them out and just who's just nice. So be nice and meet a lot of people. Like, take every opportunity you have to meet people and greet people and go to events and and of course, as I said before, be nice to them. I actually had like a few times when I exhibited the game in different events, sometimes there would be a person walking up to me and he would be like, he would play the game because I was exhibiting the game, and he would critique my work very negatively. He would like, "Oh shit, that sounds like shit. I would totally have done it this way, and I would have. Oh, I wouldn't have gone for this thing that you did like that. Why are you doing this?" And then he proceeded to later ask me for a job, or like be, "Oh, if you need some help," like, and I would never hire someone who is like, who's just spent 40 minutes basically dissing everything that I've done or everything that I worked on. So make sure to be nice and be humble, and don't don't try to don't try to force your opinions on other people. You can totally give constructive criticism, but you also have to do it nicely. And do your best to be at the right place at the right time. And this goes along with meeting as many people as possible. Of course, there's a lot of luck incorporated into this as well. But if you can, like, go to an education or go to a game jam, or just try and be at a place where a lot of people who make games are, and that will probably help to get you to the right place at the right time. And sound design is niche, and therefore you might have to do some moving to the place where you can get work. There's a lot of game studios in Sweden, for instance, but maybe you'll have to go to Stockholm, or maybe you'll have to move to Malmö, and you can't actually sit, like, for instance, like I did in Karlstad, and expect to get a job. So you have to move and be able to move or work from a distance if it's allowed. And if you have technical skills and programming, that is super helpful. That will surely give you a major bonus. And also, I don't know if there's a lot of designers or programmers or people who are working on other aspects of the game in this call, but please just include sound design. I think a lot of people don't take sound for granted, and they don't understand the amount of work that actually goes into creating all those sounds. But please include us in meetings, invite us to talk, and treat us like we also need a pre-production. We also need to make musical concepts, like you would need to make visual concepts of how the game is gonna look. We also need to make audio concepts to find our own identity as a sound, as a audio experience, basically. So include us and give us information. Don't have meetings and expect us to. Don't have meetings without us and then expect us to find the information by ourselves. Include us, invite us to the meetings, and treat us as you would any other department. Be nice to us. We're also nice, so be nice to us. Yeah, audio takes a lot of time and it can cost a lot to make. Include us in the budget. And yeah, give us cake. We like cake. At least I do. So, or just give cake to me. I like cake. Somebody have cake? No? Okay. But yeah, that was my talk. And if you have any questions, I think we have a little time for that. I hope you could hear everything. I realized, like, the videos aren't necessarily on the same volume. I hope I didn't, like, bombard anybody's ears with distortion. But yeah, thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Cajsa. Oh my God, it was a lot of information, a lot of good information, a lot of videos. It was really interesting. I see some people writing.